The wind howls across the frozen plains of eastern Ukraine, carrying with it a relentless, bone-chilling cold that seems to seep into every crevice and crack of the war-torn landscape. The blizzard sweeps across the open fields, erasing all traces of movement and hope, transforming the land into a vast, white wasteland where even the bravest hesitate to tread. This is not just any winter, it is a season of suffering, where the cold cuts deeper than any weapon, slicing through layers of clothing and armor, leaving soldiers exposed and vulnerable. The icy wind whips across barren fields, stinging faces and numbing fingers, while a cold mist drifts over the battlefield, obscuring vision and dampening spirits. Temperatures have plunged to a brutal -30°C, turning once defensible trenches into icy tombs for the 10,000 Russian soldiers deployed here. The ground is so hard that digging in is nearly impossible, and every breath feels like inhaling shards of glass. Soldiers huddle in snow-filled dugouts, their bodies shivering uncontrollably as they try to stave off the creeping numbness that threatens to overtake them. This winter, survival itself has replaced strategy. The cold has become the deadliest enemy on the front. Exhausted troops struggle against blinding blizzards, their movements slowed by layers of ice and snow. Every step is a battle, every hour a test of endurance, as the line between life and death blurs in the relentless storm. Many soldiers, still clad in thin summer uniforms and cheap, inadequate boots, huddle together for warmth, their breath freezing instantly in the frigid air. Blankets are scarce, and those that exist offer little protection against the biting cold. The camaraderie that once held units together is now replaced by a desperate need for warmth and shelter. Frostbite and pneumonia sweep mercilessly through the ranks, overwhelming already stretched medics. Fingers and toes turn black with frostbite, and lungs fill with fluid from the bitter air. Many are crippled before they ever see the enemy, their bodies broken by the elements, rather than by bullets or shrapnel. The medical tents are overflowing, and supplies are running dangerously low. The Kremlin's promises of warm gear and hot food have vanished like breath in the wind, replaced by desperate improvisation and whispered pleas for help. Soldiers scavenge for scraps of wood to build makeshift fires, their hands trembling as they try to ignite damp matches. Meals are little more than frozen rations, barely enough to sustain them through the endless nights. The Russian military's deep flaws, corruption, poor leadership, and logistical chaos are laid bare by the merciless cold. Supply lines have collapsed under the weight of snow and incompetence, leaving convoys stranded and officers frustrated. Trucks filled with essential supplies are abandoned, their contents frozen solid and useless. Putin's grand ambitions have led his army into a frozen abyss, unprepared and abandoned by those who sent them. The soldiers march through waist-deep snow, their faces etched with defeat and exhaustion. Isolated and cut off from support, they are left to fend for themselves in a landscape that offers no mercy. The front lines are littered with abandoned equipment, tanks and trucks frozen in place, helmets and gear scattered across the snow. Each piece of debris tells a silent story of human loss, of men who succumb not to enemy fire, but to the unrelenting grip of winter. This is a war being lost not just to Ukrainian resistance, but to the unforgiving power of winter itself. The frozen battlefield stretches endlessly, a stark reminder that in this conflict, nature is the ultimate adversary, one that neither side can truly conquer. As the storm rages on, the fate of thousands hangs in the balance, determined not by strategy or firepower but by the merciless cold of a new winter war on the Eastern Front. For centuries, Russia's harsh winters were its secret weapon, defeating invaders from Napoleon to Hitler. But in 2026, General Winter has turned on Russia, punishing its own army with relentless cold. Unlike the defenders of the past, today's conscripts are urban, inexperienced, and ill-equipped, stranded far from home. The myth of Russian resilience has shattered. The cold now exposes every weakness in preparation and supply. This betrayal is a psychological blow, undermining the military's identity and the state's narrative of invincibility. The frozen ground of Ukraine is now the graveyard of Russia's old myths. The true story of this brutal winter war is not found in official reports or grand strategies, but in the raw, unfiltered experiences of those trapped on the front lines. Here, amid the relentless snow and biting wind, the daily struggle for survival eclipses any notion of heroism or glory. The landscape itself becomes an adversary, as deadly as any enemy force, shaping every moment with its merciless cold. The desperation and suffering are captured in messages sent home, handwritten letters smudged by trembling hands, hurried text tapped out with numb fingers, and crackling radio transmissions that barely make it through the static. These are the voices of soldiers reaching out, hoping someone will understand the nightmare they endure. Soldiers describe the agony of frostbite, feet blackened and swollen, toes turning numb and lifeless. Each step is a torment, and the fear of losing a limb is constant. The cold seeps through every layer, making boots and socks useless against the relentless freeze. Fingers become so stiff and frozen that gripping a rifle or pulling a trigger is nearly impossible. Weapons, once symbols of power, become dead weight in hands that can barely move. The simple act of defending oneself turns into an insurmountable challenge. Medics, usually a source of hope, now find themselves powerless. Their supplies run out quickly, and the cold renders many treatments useless. They watch helplessly as injuries worsen, unable to offer more than words of comfort and a shared sense of despair. The cold is an enemy that spares nothing. Diesel fuel thickens into gel, engines refuse to start, and once mighty tanks and trucks become frozen monuments. Radios and drones, vital for communication and reconnaissance, fall silent as their batteries freeze solid, cutting off units from each other and from command. Modern technology fails, forcing armies to turn back the clock. Horses and donkeys, relics of past wars, are pressed into service to haul supplies through snowdrifts where vehicles cannot go. Sledges creak under the weight of ammunition and food, a stark reminder of how far the situation has regressed. Hunger gnaws at every soldier. With supply lines cut and rations dwindling, troops are forced to scavenge for food in ruined villages, sometimes resorting to theft just to survive. The rules of war and discipline fade as the instinct to survive takes over, and every meal becomes a small victory against starvation. Morale, once held together by camaraderie and duty, collapses under the weight of endless cold and hunger. Entire platoons refuse orders, huddling together for warmth and demanding relief. The chain of command frays as desperation breeds defiance, and the will to fight is replaced by the simple desire to escape the cold. The psychological toll is immense. Soldiers sit alone in the snow, haunted by memories and fears, their faces etched with exhaustion and hopelessness. Around campfires, stories of abandonment and loss spread faster than any enemy attack, eroding what little hope remains. Videos leak out, shaky footage of mutinies, troops surrendering en masse, and scenes of unrest that reveal an army at its breaking point. These images circulate widely, shattering the illusion of control and exposing the true cost of the winter war. The cold is not just a physical threat, it seeps into the mind, dissolving the will to fight. Exhaustion, fear, and grief become constant companions, and even the strongest soldiers find themselves questioning their purpose. This is how an army unravels, not in a single moment, but slowly, one frozen, desperate soldier at a time. The winter claims them, body and spirit, leaving only tales of frostbite and despair in its wake. The Russian army's winter crisis is rooted in logistical collapse. Railways, once the backbone of supply, are shattered by Ukrainian strikes, leaving depots full but front lines starving. Roads are impassable, trucks break down or become easy targets, and winter gear never reaches the troops. Fuel shortages force impossible choices: heat the men or move the tanks. Often, neither happens. Corruption has gutted the system. Warehouses meant for winter gear are empty, their contents long sold off. The military bureaucracy is rigid, punishing initiative and rewarding obedience, unable to adapt to disaster. Putin's army, built for parades, is paralyzed in the mud and ice. The promise of a swift advance has become a nightmare of stagnation. The long road to Kiev has become a frozen dead end. The war is not just a military disaster, it's an economic one, pushing Russia to the brink. Military spending devours nearly 40% of the budget, forcing the government to print money and drain reserves. Inflation soars, savings evaporate, and basic goods become luxuries for ordinary Russians. The cost of winter gear and abandoned hardware is staggering, while sanctions choke off vital technology. The pain is sharpest in the provinces, where families lose both breadwinners and economic security. Local governments are broke, unable to provide basic services. The war's costs are coming home as poverty, decay, and a sense of a stolen future. Putin's promise of stability in exchange for prosperity has collapsed. For years, the Kremlin showcased its military might with grand parades in Red Square, tanks rolling past cheering crowds, and soldiers marching in perfect formation. These displays were carefully choreographed to project an image of invincibility, a message to the world, and to the Russian people, that their armed forces were modern, powerful, and unstoppable. The myth of Russian military supremacy was not just a point of national pride, it was a cornerstone of the regime's authority, a symbol of strength that underpinned Vladimir Putin's grip on power. But the brutal winter war in Ukraine has shattered this carefully constructed illusion. The world now sees a very different reality. A Russian army struggling to advance, bogged down in snow and mud, its equipment battered and its morale shaken. The myth of invincibility has melted away under the harsh glare of battlefield losses and strategic failures. Instead of cutting-edge weaponry, the front lines are littered with rusting relics from the 1950s and 60s, Soviet-era tanks that break down in the cold, their armor no match for modern weapons. These once feared machines now sit abandoned, half-buried, in snow, silent witnesses to a military unprepared for the realities of modern warfare. Russian tactics remain rigid and outdated, with commanders repeating the same mistakes, unable to adapt to the challenges of winter combat. Leadership is often incompetent, and the rank-and-file soldiers are woefully ill-equipped for the freezing temperatures. Many lack even the most basic winter gear, warm clothing, boots, or gloves, leaving them vulnerable to frostbite and exhaustion. The myth of strategic genius once attributed to Russian generals has evaporated. In its place is a growing body of evidence, blunders on the battlefield, chaotic retreats, and a shocking disregard for the lives of ordinary soldiers. The cost of these mistakes is measured not just in lost territory but in shattered lives and growing disillusionment. As news of defeat and mounting casualties filters back home, disillusionment spreads through Russian society. The public, once proud of their military's reputation, now watches with worry and disbelief as the reality of failure becomes impossible to ignore. The myth that once united the nation is now a source of anxiety and doubt. The military, once a pillar of Putin's power and a symbol of national pride, is now increasingly seen as a symbol of failure and decay. Bases fall into disrepair, equipment is left abandoned, and the troops themselves are demoralized, questioning the purpose of their sacrifice. Russians were told they had the world's second-best army, a force to be feared and respected. But now, they see an army that can't even provide its soldiers with warm socks or proper winter boots. Stories of supply shortages, frostbite, and neglect circulate widely, further eroding confidence in the military and the government. The frozen fields of Ukraine have become a graveyard for Putin's most cherished myth. Destroyed vehicles, abandoned helmets, and the bodies of fallen soldiers are stark reminders of a war that has exposed the limits of Russian power. As the winter drags on, the regime's legitimacy is melting away, one frozen soldier at a time. The image of invincibility has been replaced by the harsh reality of defeat, and the consequences will echo far beyond the battlefield. As losses mount, the Kremlin scrapes the bottom of the barrel, conscripting men in their 50s and 60s. These are not soldiers, but grandfathers and clerks, sent to the front with minimal training. Their presence signals desperation, further eroding morale and exposing the regime's weakness. Communities are stripped of working-age men, families left without support. The state's legitimacy crumbles as it sacrifices its most vulnerable for a lost cause. This is not patriotic mobilization, it's a predatory levy on the powerless. The winter of 2026 is revealing the fragility of the Russian state. As resources are funneled to the front, cities at home freeze, heating fails, power grids collapse, and public services decay. Sanctions and brain drain hollow out the economy, while propaganda loses its grip on a population living the war's true cost. Trust in the regime erodes as the gap between official lies and daily hardship widens. Cynicism replaces consent. The social contract is broken. Putin's quest for strength has accelerated Russia's decline. The state grows brittle, its ability to manage crisis fading. The war in Ukraine is now an existential threat to Russia itself. As Russian forces freeze, Ukraine adapts and endures. Defending their homeland, Ukrainian troops are equipped with NATO-supplied winter gear and supported by secure supply lines. The cold becomes a weapon. Ukrainian units stay mobile, raiding static Russian positions. Drones with thermal cameras turn Russian campfires into targets. Western support sustains Ukraine's war effort, while Russia is isolated and reliant on decaying stockpiles. The winter is a turning point. Russian losses mount, the economy buckles, and society fractures. For Ukraine, it's a test of endurance they are passing. Courage, ingenuity, and allied support are overcoming brute force. The frozen plains are forging a new, determined Ukraine. Meanwhile, their factors see set. To freeze and falter.